I certainly think pension ages have had to go up in the UK and indeed around much of the world because over a century we've been living longer, we've stopped smoking, fewer of us work in heavy industry, NHS and medicine have improved. So you can see over decades that's why pension ages have had to go up. But since 5 years ago, which is the last time the government looked at it, those improvements have come to a juddering halt. So even before the pandemic, improvements in life expectancy had stalled. And I think the challenge really for the government is if they came to the right answer 5 years ago when they last looked at this, why do they now need to speed things up? It's not, unfortunately, because we're all living longer, because that has now stopped.
But did they come to the right answer 5 years ago? I mean, obviously these things usually tend to be political decisions rather than logical decisions. So is it just the case that actually it wasn't rising fast enough before and they're still having to catch up?
There is kind of no right answer. There is a balance here between how long we're all expected to work and how long we'll be in retirement for. I guess the idea of the 5-yearly review, which is what we've got happening at the moment, and the government has to report back by May, was to try and be systematic about this rather than what's happened in the past and the government just plucked a date out of the air. The principle was going to be that we would spend 2/3 of our adult life in work and 1/3 in retirement. And that feels about fair. You know, you say you're 20 and the statisticians think you'll live to 95. Well, that's 75 years. 2/3 of that is 50. So the idea is you'd work from 20 to 70 and then have 25 years of pension, if the statisticians are right. And that's obviously just an average. Now, that's the theory. And that produced the dates that we got, or broadly the dates we've had 5 years ago. That information hasn't really changed since then. So I think the argument for sort of suddenly rushing this forward, changing people's plans at relatively short notice, it's hard to explain or justify, I think.
So, Steve, definitely you look at life expectancy, but we know the other bit of the equation is, can you afford it? Is the money in the kitty to be able to pay people their pensions? And I'm taking it this is the bit of the equation they're looking at now, particularly after all of the money that was spent during lockdown.
It is. I mean, one of the things about putting pension age up is it saves you money for a few years, but then we know we're going to get to 68 anyway. In other words, the plan the government announced 5 years ago was we get to 68 in 2039, so about 15, 16 years hence. So pension age for anybody, let's say, under 50 is already 68. We're talking about people in their early 50s. And at the moment, they might expect a pension of at 67. They'll get one at 68 if these plans go ahead. It'll cost them about £10,000 a head, because a year's state pension is £10,000. So for those of us who are lucky enough to enjoy what we do, to be fit and well enough to work, we'll lose £10,000 of pension. But there's a whole bunch of people who don't make it to pension age, at least in a healthy way. So they're already on benefit, universal credit and so on. As you know, that's a pretty minimal standard of living. They will simply have to eke that out for another year. And these changes do have a big impact on, as you know, different bits of the country. And if you live in Glasgow or Blackpool or the East End of London, the number of years you will get a pension is much lower than average. And if you then take a year out of that, that's a big chunk for those who've had probably the toughest lives in many cases. So the impact of this is quite unevenly felt.